Tevet, Vat, Rosh Chodesh Vat, which means Tu B'Shvat will be here before we look round. Tonight I want to dedicate this year to a few people. First of all, to Jackie Braham's late father, Zvi ben Moshe, to Yocheved's late husband, Charles, who is Zalman Meir ben Yaakov, whose Yortzeit was on the 27th of Tevet, and Jackie's father's on the 26th of Shvat. And also we wish a refuah shlema to Norma, who is going to have a small operation tomorrow, so we wish her a refuah shlema for that. And I know she's joining us, so I hope you don't mind me mentioning it, Norma.
I'm having a baby.
You're having a baby, that's even better. And I also want to mention, actually, he's my nephew by marriage, but a very dear, close member of our family, Yossi. Unfortunately, I don't know his mother's name, to wish him a refuah shlema as well. He's in our thoughts. Now, let me go on. I'm delighted to welcome Suzie as our speaker this evening, Suzie Goldberg, who has on many occasions given us so many lovely shiurim. Suzie is a proud mother and grandmother who has spent her life teaching mainly Chodesh and religious studies at GCSE and A-level. Since religious studies syllabus now includes teaching about an alternative religion, she now spends time teaching non-Jewish children and their teachers and RS heads of department all about Judaism to help them understand authentic Judaism as opposed to the other branches we possess in our famous religion. She's also hosted converts and tutors them as well. Suzie is very busy with her, most busy of all, she says, making shidduchim, which gives her great pleasure, and is involved with a database for many people from all backgrounds, which is so important for that purpose. During lockdown, they actually launched a program called Zoom with Whom, and the initiative brought in 10 people, 5 boys, 5 girls, and they met on screen for about 40 minutes. And if there was any interest, then they would facilitate progressing the dates further, which is a wonderful thing to do. I think it's perhaps one should do it all the time. That way you can see what the person looks like as well before you get to actually meet them in person. Anyway, Suzie, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to ask you to talk. And the title of Suzie's talk tonight is The Birth of the Nation. And the themes from the book of Shemot, which we've just started. And Suzie, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome from all over the world. Nice to see you all. This is your time, so please feel very free to interrupt if you don't understand something I'm saying. I don't know if I'll know the answer, but more than welcome. Please feel free to contribute. So I had prepared some things on Tu B'Shvat, but I'm absolutely sure that you will have another session before Tu B'Shvat. So if we've got time, we might tackle some topics. But I'm going to go straight into the actual title for tonight, which is some themes in the book of Shemot. We've just finished the book of Bereshit, and in the book of Bereshit, it was the birth of a family. And it's really interesting to note that this book includes bestsellers that if you went to see them in the cinema, you'd say, nah, now that is so unlikely. That is just, couldn't happen in real life. I mean, we're talking about a warts and all family story. We're talking about murder. We're talking about sibling rivalry. We're talking about rape. We're talking about infertility. We're talking about so many topics that are so applicable to us today in our century, in the 21st century, that it's curious to note that they actually came from the Bible. I mean, this is our Torah. This is where it all comes from. And by the time we get to the end of Bereshit, we've seen it all. We've actually seen the entire birth of a nation. And we needed these stories to introduce us to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and the whole family to finish off as we come into the book of Shemot, as we come into Egypt. And as we come into Egypt, we are becoming the birth of a nation. So let me just ask you, please call out, how would you translate Shemot?
It's names, isn't it?
Okay, could be names. Anybody else got any ideas? How else do we translate Shemot? What about Exodus?
Yes.
Exodus. And it's interesting to note that we use the book of Shemot as names, okay? But it's such an interesting name for the book. We're going to come to it. That's the name that that's the title that we're going to concentrate on. But it's interesting to note that the actual book of Exodus, it's let my people go. And we tend to forget the other part of the title, so that you can serve me. That's the birth of a nation. It's let my people go, not for anything, not to do whatever you want. It's so that you can serve me. And it's interesting to note that we sometimes forget about that bit. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. We know that a name changes. We know that a name changes if you get married, if you want to change your name by default. It depends on your situation in life. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on tonight in a little while. Judaism isn't at all about what you say, it's about what you do. Okay, it's not, I mean, I can say to you that, you know, I'm a teacher of, I don't know, cookery. And I can say to my class, you know, you need to eat healthily. And it comes to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the school bell goes and you see me down at the local grease joint and you'll say to me, what are you doing? You've just told me to eat healthily. And I say, but it's 4 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock, school's finished. So I don't have to eat healthily anymore. Judaism isn't like that. Judaism isn't a 9 to 4 by the clock. Judaism is do what I do, not do what I say. It's a very different sort of life. And it's all about passing on this tradition, this Torah. We're going to talk about the book of Shemot, and we're going to be introduced to Moshe. So Moshe lived to be, how old was he when he died? A perfect
120.
120, and that's why we say to people that they should live ad mea v'esrim. Isn't it interesting that the first 40 years of his life, he spent as a Mitzri in Egypt. He was an Egyptian, the first 40 years of his life. The second 40 years of his life, he spent in Midian. The third 40 years of his life, he spent in the Midbar, in the desert. All 3 parts of his life begin with a mem. The number 40 is mem. And it's not a coincidence, it's just, you know, that there's so many of these things, okay? So we transitioned from this family that we became a nation, from Bereshit to Shemot, and we transitioned from Yaakov's boys, you know, that family Yaakov's boys. And I'd just like to read you a little bit from chapter 1, verse 1 from Shemot, where it says, these are the names of the Bnei Yisrael, Ve'ele Shemot Bnei Yisrael Haba'im Mitzrayim et Yaakov. Okay, these are the names of the Bnei Yisrael, sons of Yisrael who came to Egypt, and then it mentions them. So we transition from being Yaakov's boys to a little bit later on in chapter 1, verse 9, where Vayomer el Amo, he said to the people, Hinei B'nai Yisrael. So there you've got that transition from being a family to becoming a nation, Amo. We've suddenly transitioned from becoming the children of Yaakov, Yaakov's boys, to suddenly becoming a people. And that's just such a lovely way to look at it. That's the book of Bereshit. Let's go one step further. In the book of Bereshit, we have the covenant that God made with Adam that then developed into the covenant that God made with Noah. If you remember, Adam didn't even know there was a covenant being made. And then afterwards, God says to him, and the covenant that I made with you. And Adam sort of scratching his head saying, what covenant? And it wasn't until the whole world was destroyed and Noah comes out of the ark and he looks around and he says, oh my goodness, I am the only over. God, I want to make a covenant with you. And God says, bless, this is music to my ears. And he says, okay, so what's the covenant going to be? And Noah says, God says to Noah, I'm going to give you the whole world and everything in it. And Noah says, yes, and I'm going to take the world, I'm going to look after it, and I'm going to pass it on. Except God says, well, that was the same covenant that I made with Adam, and it didn't work. Within 10 generations, the whole world was destroyed. And then we get the introduction of the 7 Noahide laws, which changes everything. They still exist today. We still believe if society lived by these 7 Noahide laws, the world would thrive. And God was so happy with that, he made a rainbow, and he swore on the rainbow that we still make a bracha today. Zocher habrit v'ne'eman bivrito v'kayam b'ma'amaro. We still swear on that covenant today. Still exists today. And that doesn't take away from the next covenant that God makes with Abraham. And when God meets Abraham, the first ethical monotheist, the first person to really internalize that there is a God, that God turns round to him and says, I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. At this point, Abraham was really quite old. And he doesn't say, what, really? How come? Got no kids, how does this work? He says, I'm also going to give you the land of Israel, not for now, for some time in the future. And here we get to the bit that I want to come to. Abraham turns around and says, I'm overwhelmed. And God says, I want you to walk before me and be perfect. Physically, the sign of this covenant was the Brit Milah. Spiritually, how to be perfect comes in our parasha, in the covenant that God makes with, it's next week's parasha, in Yitro, when Hashem gives us the Torah. Where Hashem says that the sign of the covenant of how to walk before Abraham and be perfect is the Torah. The sign is the Torah. Our side is the Torah, and Hashem's side is the Torah. So let's see how all of this works together. The covenant that Hashem made with Noah was universal. The covenant that Hashem made with Abraham is physical. And the covenant that Hashem makes with Moshe is spiritual. It's this covenant that Hashem makes with Moshe in next week's Sedra, in Parashat Yitro, that we need to actually start to analyze. What does it mean? What is the spirituality of what we're talking about here? Let's go back to, I can't remember, it was Norma's first answer, that Shemot is names. Let's talk about this concept of names. When Hashem turns round to Abraham and says turns round to Moshe and says to Moshe, when the people ask you, who is sending you to send out the people, say, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I will be what I will be. And Moshe says that's not going to work. The people can't understand the future. They can't understand, they can't project. They're slaves. They can't project to freedom. And that name isn't going to work. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the names of Hashem. Perhaps I could ask you, throw out some names and see if we can come to some sorts of conclusions what these different names mean. What names do we call God? Elohim. So do you know what? Hamokom, absolutely. Let's talk about Elohim for a minute. Elohim
El Shaddai.
Absolutely, we're going to come to that one very, very quickly. So clearly, we're all familiar with different names. Elohim is very often used when we're judging. It's a name that we turn to God when it's judgment. Okay. When we talk about Hashem, we talk about him as Hashem as the name. The name itself, Hashem, isn't holy. Hashem shali Suzie, Hashem shalach Norma, Hashem shalach Yochevet, or Hashem shalach whatever. It's not the concept that we won't even call him by his name. We will only say Hashem in itself just illustrates that each name of Hashem has its own power. And that's a little bit what I want to talk about today. Hashem says, Ehye asher ehye, I'll always be with you. I will never leave you. And Moshe replies to that. The future concept is just too great. They are slaves at the moment. It's too complicated. So if we're talking about names reflecting relationships, let's talk about the completion of the covenant that Hashem made with Abraham as Yud Kei Vav Kei in Bereshit to Kel Shakai of this week's parasha. So let's talk about it now in a little bit more detail. Please interrupt me if I've lost anybody. In the beginning of Va'era, Hashem says, Ani Hashem, I'm God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Ani Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei, Va'era Avraham, El Yitzchak, Ve'el Yaakov, Ve'el Bekel Shakai. Ushmi Yud Kei Vav Kei, Lo Nadati Lahem. What's Hashem saying here? He's saying, I am Yud Kei Vav Kei. We're going to say Yud Kei Vav Kei because I don't know how else to pronounce it. And Hashem saying, and I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and to Yaakov as Kel Shakai. But with my name Yud Kei Vav Kei, I wasn't made known to them. And Hashem says this in Shemot chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. But that's not quite true because Hashem did introduce himself to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as Yud Kei Vav Kei. We know in Genesis chapter 14, he says, I have lifted up my hand to Yud Kei Vav Kei. About Abraham. Abraham says, I lifted up my hand to Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he did know Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei. And about Yitzchak, it says in Genesis chapter 27, it says, Yitzchak says, and I will bless before Yud Kei Vav Kei. And Yaakov says in Genesis chapter 27, Yud Kei Vav Kei made it happen very quickly for me. So clearly where it says in last week's parasha, Ushmi Yud Kei Vav Kei Lo Nadati Lahem, that I didn't make myself known to them as Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's not true. Hashem did make himself known to them as Yud Kei Vav. So we need to explore a little bit more. What is Yud Kei Vav Kei and what is Kel Shakai? And why does Hashem say that he didn't appear to them as Yud Kei Vav Kei, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but he only appeared to them as Kel Shakai? What's going on here? We need to explore. So clearly they did know the name. When Hashem spoke to them and said to them, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that they didn't know Yud Kei Vav Kei, he was speaking figuratively. He was saying, there are different aspects to who I am as Hashem. We're playing on the name of this whole sefer of Shemot as names, and we're looking at the different names of Hashem. So clearly Hashem is telling us very, very clearly that there are different names of Hashem, and they mean different things, and we are now going to explore what they mean. The Kel Shakai aspect, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov knew very, very well, but the Yud Kei Vav Kei less so. They knew the name, but they didn't know what it means. One God, many aspects. Between us, we've already come up with Makom and Elokim, so we know that there are many different names. One God, different aspects. And what we're going to do now is explore perhaps the difference between Shemot, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and Kel Shakai. What are these different aspects? What is the Yud Kei Vav Kei aspect of Hashem? And what is the Kel Shakai aspect of Hashem? So, in the beginning of Shemot, when it says that Hashem appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as Kel Shakai, it actually happened. He really did appear to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as Kel Shakai. How do we know that? Well, it says in Genesis, in Bereshit chapter Yud Zayin, it says, Vayera Hashem, Vayera Yud Kei Vav Kei Avraham El Vayomer Elav Ani Kel Shakai. It says, I am Kel Shakai. And that's the first time in Bereshit that we ever hear this Kel Shakai in the entire Torah. So we need to have a look. What is God telling us? What does Kel Shakai mean? What did Hashem say to Abraham there? And how does Hashem want Abraham to understand Kel Shakai? It says, I am Kel Shakai. Walk before me and be perfect. Have you heard that phrase before? About 10 minutes ago. In what context have you heard this phrase, I am Kel Shakai, walk before me and be perfect? Who did he say it to and what were the circumstances? Anybody remember? Adele?
Noah. Oh, yeah. Didn't he say it to Noah?
Said it to Abraham.
Oh, Abraham.
He said it to Abraham. It was the one after. Does anybody remember why he said it to Abraham? What was the context? When he said to Abraham, I want to make a covenant with you. And Hashem said to him, I'm going to promise you the land of Israel. And I'm also going to promise you to be the father of a generation. Many, many generations. You're going to be a great name. And he said, come, Abraham, walk before me and be perfect. And Abraham was overwhelmed. And what did Abraham sign on that covenant? Does anybody remember the physical sign of that covenant?
The bris milah.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So the first time we come across Kel Shakai is when Hashem says to Abraham, walk before me and be perfect, in response to Hashem promising Abraham the covenant. So how are you supposed to relate to this concept of walking before Hashem? That means you're walking in front of Hashem. That means Hashem is walking behind. What does it mean to walk before God? The only other time we get this idea of walking before God is a really interesting example of walking before God when in Bereshit chapter 48, where it says, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Yitzhak walked, walking before God, the God who has been shepherd for my whole life until today. Yaakov is dying, and on his deathbed, he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. And he says to Ephraim and Manasseh, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Yitzhak walked before God, same concept again. Except Yaakov finishes this on his deathbed by saying, he adds on this bit, not just walking before God, but he adds on, God who has been my shepherd for my whole life until today. What new concept have we introduced here to walking before God?
Like sheep.
A carer.
Absolutely right. That God is now a shepherd, that he's caring for his sheep. Let's understand this. According to the Medrash, well, let's leave that for a minute. So God is your shepherd. You, the people, us, we are his sheep. It sounds really religious. Let's try and understand. Does anybody know anything about shepherding sheep? Does anybody know how a shepherd leads his sheep?
They walk in front.
Absolutely right.
And the shepherd is behind.
Absolutely. And how does, if the shepherd would be in the front, would the sheep know what to do?
No.
No, absolutely not. The way a sheep knows where to go is the very back sheep will feel the shepherd's presence through his peripheral vision. And what he'll be able to do is feel the shepherd's presence and nod the sheep in front, who will nod the sheep in front, who will nod the sheep in front. And if the shepherd is really, really good at doing this, this isn't me saying so, this is an animal scientist telling me this, that if the shepherd is really, really good, he will be able to prevent the sheep going off at tangents and at angles and falling and endangering themselves. It is through this method of being there physically at the back that the sheep at the back nudges the one in front and nudges the one in front and nudges the one in front. And that's how the shepherd is able to shepherd his flock safely. So that's really, really quite fascinating if we take that concept now and put it into what Hashem's doing for us. A shepherd doesn't want the sheep to decide where to go. He wants the shepherd to be, he wants the sheep to be led by him. Sheep could get themselves into all sorts of trouble and all sorts of danger. The shepherd's got to guide them, and he does it from behind. When a shepherd stands just behind the flock at the very back perceive the shepherd, just barely, but perceive the shepherd through peripheral vision, and the sheep's instinct tells him it's time to move. So he moves, and he gently bumps the sheep in front, and the whole flock has suddenly changed its course with the shepherd leading from behind. And that's really a cool concept. The sheep don't even realize that they're being guided by the shepherd. They have no idea. And from their own perspective, the sheep feel the pressure of the sheep behind, but the shepherd is there the whole time, watching, guiding, protecting from predators, from poisonous plants. And he won't even know that he's being guided. The sheep won't even know that they're being guided by the sheep. Now, if that's the metaphor that we're using, and we're right about Yaakov's verse, walking before God means that Hashem is our shepherd, then maybe we're able to understand exactly what the Kel Shakai is all about. Walk before me, he's saying something like this, Hashem. Hashem is saying to Abraham something like, I've made all these grand promises to you that you're going to be the father of a great nation, although he was very old at this time and didn't have any children, and that you're going to inherit the land of Israel. Absolutely unbelievable. But those are long-term promises. You might not realize this yet, but you're not going to see them fulfilled in your lifetime. And because you don't see these promises coming true, Abraham, you may feel that I'm not there with you, that I'm absent from your life. But that's because, Abraham, I'm behind you. I'm leading from behind. You can't see me. You're not seeing me saving you miraculously from harm. You're not seeing that I'm guiding your life. You feel like you're at the mercy of all these mundane things that are going on, these influences. There's a famine, you have to go to Egypt, you're getting sucked into the war, you have to save your nephew Lot. You feel like your whole life, you're just being pushed around by the sheep behind you. But you're not. I'm standing right behind you. I'm guiding you to where you need to go. I am your shepherd. And you need to keep on walking fearlessly right before me. And that Kel Shakai analogy is a shepherd where Hashem is asking us to be his sheep. If that's true, we need to understand what the Yud Kei Vav Kei means. We come back to God's opening statement in the book of Va'era, in the Seder of Va'era last week. It's now hundreds of years since the era of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We've been in slaves for 210 years. And Hashem says to Moshe, Abraham only knew me as Kel Shakai. He only saw me as leading from behind, quietly. Of course, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all saw miracles in their life. But the miracles that they saw were the quiet sort. They weren't the bursting on the scene sort. When we introduce the book of Shemot, it's almost instantly plagues, splitting of the sea, the revelation at Sinai. It's loud. There is no quiet shepherding from behind. The Yud Kei Vav Kei that we are experiencing in the book of Shemot is a total different element of Hashem leading us. Kel Shakai is the God that you walk before, that you're in front and Hashem is behind us. You can't see Hashem. The Yud Kei Vav Kei is the God who you can see. In Egypt, we felt him. When we came out of Egypt with the plagues, we felt him. He brought us out with a strong hand, with an outstretched arm. The whole world saw the miracles of the splitting of the sea. When it came to the revelation a little bit further on in a couple of weeks' time, we all stood at Sinai. The whole world experienced revelation. The whole world experienced the birds didn't weep, the dogs didn't bark. The whole world heard God. That's not Kel Shakai. That's not a shepherd shepherding from behind. It's a far cry from God as the shepherd. That God didn't guide from behind at all. That God did not ask us to walk before him. He was right there amongst us. We could see him. Abraham never knew a God like that. So when we go back to that original pasuk that says Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did not know Hashem as Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's what it's talking about. Hashem, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov knew Hashem as Kel Shakai, the shepherd God, the God that walked before him. Now we come into the book of Shemot, of names for changing tactics. Now we're coming into Hashem as Yud Kei Vav Kei, the God of signs and wonders and miracles, and a totally different God, which is all very nice. But where does that leave us today? What are we supposed to do with all of this information? Are we the God of Yud Kei Vav Kei? Are we the God of Kel Shakai? And I think it's a little bit of both. We need an aspect of God that manifests in our world. We need to understand where Hashem fits in. Do we live with a God of Exodus, the God we can't deny, with open miracles? Do we live with the God of the forefathers, the Kel Shakai, the God who can't be seen, who guides us from behind, just behind, beyond the scope of our vision? And the truth is, it's probably a little bit of both. Abraham never lived to see the wonders and the miracles that Moshe witnessed. And today, we've become the nation that developed from the book of Bereshit. We have become that people. We have become Bnei Israel. The promise came true. We can see it nearly as clearly as the generation of the Exodus that saw the splitting of the sea. But some of the promises that were made to Abraham, we're still waiting for. We're still waiting for the concept that nations won't lift up their swords anymore, and there will be international peace, and Messiah will come, and we will go to the promised land with Messiah. We're still waiting for those. We're holding on to those promises. We're realizing that we may never see them fulfilled in our lifetime, but nor did Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov see so many of the promises that were made to them. We saw some of the promises that were made to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but not all, and we're still waiting on so many more. We're seeing two valid parts to the faith question. A mature faith in God has to relate to both the silent type that we feel him and the visual side that we see him. There are times that we get to walk before God. We get to walk with him, and we can experience Hashem's presence so clearly and closely, be it through personal miracles or national miracles. We can see God's hand in our lives. We can bask in the intimacy and the clarity. But there are also times when Hashem says, I'm going to hang back. I need you to go on ahead. I'm here. I'm right behind you. Can you do that? I know it feels lonely, but can you do that? Hashem isn't abandoning us at those times. He's playing the shepherd, and he's living the relationship that he had with us that he first enjoyed with Abraham. He's guiding us from behind. If we move on a little bit, just a little bit further into the next point, that we struggle with who Hashem is. We can't comprehend Yud Kei Vav Kei or Kel Shakai. There are times that we're floundering. And Hashem says to us, I'll tell you who I am. And he shows it so clearly in these weeks of the parasha. The command to build the Mishkan comes before the Mishkan is actually built. And in between the command to build the Mishkan and the building of the Mishkan itself is the most horrendous episode in our history, which is, of course, the story of the golden calf. Having experienced all the miracles of Yud Kei Vav Kei, we still managed to fall to the golden calf. And even in that, there is such a powerful lesson. Hashem commanded us to build the Mishkan. We had the Egel, and then we built the Mishkan. Because Hashem says clearly, there are times that we need that feel, that manifestation of Hashem. We need the Mishkan. So he gives us the cure before the illness. He tells us, you will have that physical manifestation. We then have the illness, the Egel HaZahav. And then we have the cure, which is the Mishkan itself. When Hashem expelled the people in Spain in 1492, Christopher Columbus was already discovering America. As we were being expelled from Spain, the cure of where we could go to as a people was already being found. He gives us the cure before he gives us the illness. He gave us the Mishkan before we had the Egel HaZahav. And that is who Hashem is. He realizes that we need the physical manifestation, and that's why we have shuls. We have physical things that we can identify with. We have the kotel. We have physicality, which is what we need. And so to conclude, we have the book of Shemot, be it Exodus, let my people go so that I can save you, so that I can serve you, Hashem, or be it Shemot, names change us, Hashem's names have different connotations. We can see Hashem. Sometimes we need to close our eyes and we try to imagine what Hashem is. We need to capture him. But how can we do that? He's much more than a picture. He's much more than a name. We pass places. If you go on a train ride or a car ride and you pass places along the way, you see them, but you don't get a feel of what they are. Hashem's name is just a feel of what he is, but it doesn't give us a real taste of who he is. You can have a business card in your wallet, but it doesn't tell you anything about the person who's really on the business card. But having the business card in your wallet is comforting to know it's there. Going on a journey and seeing all the places that you pass along the way, it's comforting to know that there's a whole world out there. You may not know an awful lot about them, but you know they are there. And these names of Hashem help us try to discover the different facets of Hashem. And all of this takes us to the next book of Vayikra, which we will do, please God, in a few weeks' time, which is all about the inauguration of the Mishkan itself. So those are just some ideas I wanted to share with you about the book of Bereshit leading to the book of Shemot, and just tantalizingly to look forward to the book of Vayikra, which will be all about the physicality of the Mishkan. Any questions?
Any questions?
Comments, questions?
Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Feel free. Oh, that was quite some talk, what can one say? You know what struck me, if I can just say it? For the first time, I think I've understood that psalm, but the Lord is my shepherd. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Brought it all into text. Nobody's got anything? Nobody wants to ask anything?
No.
You must have overwhelmed her. What can I say? I'm going to ask Hilary then, please, would like to give the vote of thanks on behalf of everybody tonight.
I actually don't know where to start because it was such a fascinating and thought-provoking talk. And one thought that specifically came to my mind was at our most solemn time of the year, when we are looking to reflect on what we've done and look for guidance, we better in the coming year, what phrase do we use? Kavakoas roa edro.
Beautiful.
As a shepherd leads his flock.
Yeah.
And I had never thought of the link before. So for me, and I hope for everybody else, you have given the most thought-provoking and fascinating analysis, I'm going to call it, of the different aspects of Hashem, which we don't seriously think about. And I just think you're fantastic. You've found enough time in your very busy schedule to prepare this for us and to give us all these thoughts. Many, many thanks.
A pleasure. I think I gain the most. Always, always.
Very enlightening.
Well, it's certainly mutual, there's no doubt about that.
Thank you all.
If anybody wants to just chat please God, I will be arranging next year for February, but I haven't got a date yet, so I'll sort out. And Suzie, thanks a million, because it really was a very, very special show this evening. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Be well, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
Thank
Thank
you. Really.